Good evening, everyone. I'm Susan James, Library Manager here at Bayliss Library and Assistant Director of the Superior District Library. And thanks for coming, and thank you too to Michael Klassen for speaking tonight. And over the last 30 years, Michael Klassen has worked as an author, journalist, columnist, photographer, editor, and publisher. For 20 years, he published Above the Bridge magazine, a UP regional publication. In recent years, he has published numerous horror and adventure stories, some of which are set in UP. Tonight, he's speaking about his new nonfiction book, Sable Point Lighthouse, a beacon on Lake Superior's shipwreck coast. His book is available for purchase and signing afterwards. Please welcome Michael Klassen.
Well, thanks. I'm glad to see everybody came here, and hopefully everybody got out to vote today. I'm going to be talking about Sable Point. I don't know how many of you know where it's at, but it's just down the creek from here. Right about here in Pictured Rocks National Lakeshore, just to about 10 miles to the west of Grand Marais. One of the things I want to talk about with Sable Point is we almost lost Sable Point, the lighthouse that's over there. Many of our lighthouses were sold off over the years, and we've lost an awful lot of them. Sable Point is a complete complex. It has not only the main light buildings, but it has the other keepers buildings, it has the fog building, it even has the outhouses. It's really quite nice. I was able to live in Grand Marais, just not too far from the lighthouse, when they first started the restoration of it. And that's really what got me interested in it. And the National Park Service was wonderfully helpful in allowing me to get in to read the lighthouse logs, provided me with a lot of the pictures. A lot of the images that you'll see are from the National Park Service. They were wonderfully helpful in it. Voyageurs. When the first time we even get a reference of Sable Point is with Pierre Radisson when he came through on his third voyage through Lake Superior. Voyageurs, when they came through, they recorded everything. They were one of the very first people to actually have coherent journals about Lake Superior. And when Radisson went over Sable Point, he wrote in his journal, "Most dangerous when there is any storms." And I originally wanted to call the book The Most Dangerous Place after that quote, but my editor decided to go for keywords and went the Lake Superior shipwreck coast so that they get it called up on the computers. But anyway, when in 1820, when General Cass came along, or Lieutenant Governor Cass, our territorial governor, came along and had his exposition in 1832. He took along Henry Schoolcraft. And Henry Schoolcraft was quite articulate and wrote about literally everything he could possibly come across. He also wrote about Sable Point. We camped on a beach of sand near the entrance of a small creek, which from a violent storm that raged during the night was called Hurricane Creek. It still bears the name. This storm had threatened us before reaching the land. In a short time, the wind raged with the utmost violence and threw the lake into such disorder that the water drove into the governor's marquee, pitched 50 yards from the shore, and beat it down. At the same time, the thunder was very frequent and severe, and when the fury of the gale abated, a heavy rain drenched every part of our camp. This is the typical type of weather that you find at Sable Point. It gets violent, it gets vicious. Lake Superior on that section of, because of the Pictured Rocks National Lakeshore, tends to throw out fogs. a lot of severe fogs, as well as, of course, you get the typical Lake Superior quick storms, that kind of thing. But because of the fogs, the old ships, when they first started out, would do a thing called coasting, which means you keep the shore in sight, or attempt to anyway, at least maybe hear it, that type of thing. Any change of sounds. You'll hear about that a little bit later in one of the passages I'm going to read. But because of that, Sable Point has a reef that sticks 1 mile out and is about 6 foot underwater of Jacobsville sandstone. It's a natural ship trap, so that whenever the ships would come along from along the shore, they would frequently run into it, not realizing they were there. It became one of the most notorious and dangerous places along the shipwreck coast. And there are probably more wrecks in that one spot as opposed to anywhere else along Lake Superior's coast. This is an old woodcut from about the period when shipping first started on Lake Superior. That's Chapel Rock. And it depicts a lot of the typical types of shipwrecks that would happen along there. In the summer of 1858, a side wheeler named Lady Elgin was one of the first ships to run aground on Sable Point. For 2 days it stayed there stranded with the captain and crew, not knowing whether they would sight a ship and be rescued from there as the storm rose and the ship would be a sitting duck. Finally, it was seen by the steamer Illinois, who lent aid, and the Illinois took on Lady Elgin's cargo and pulled her free. 4 years later, 1862, during one of the fogs, a ship called the Oriole, a schooner carrying ore, collided with the steamer Illinois and was cut in half. Neither ship had seen the other, and the collision came as a complete surprise. All hands on the Oriole were lost except for one, and the disaster was the direct result of the Sable fog. These types of incidents began happening one after the other after the other. The situation was getting serious. Men were dying and ships were sinking, and something had to be done about it. Since changing Lake Superior's weather wasn't an option, it was time for something that was an option, a lighthouse. Other lighthouses had been springing up around Lake Superior. Why not Sable? The 11th District Lighthouse, which is what administrates all of the region and the area from northern Lake Michigan, northern Lake Huron, into all through Lake Superior. In all navigation, they put out a report that says, in all navigation of Lake Superior, there is none more dreaded by the mariner than that from Whitefish Point to Grand Island. And they continued with, the light was more necessity at Sable Point than any other unprotected location in the district. In the shipping year of 1870 to 1871 alone, Lake Superior along that coast had claimed 214 lives. Because of this incredible loss of life happening year after year, season after season, the Lighthouse Board finally agreed to put a lighthouse there in 1874. When the lighthouse was put up, they expected that it would do a lot to avert the shipping accidents. It didn't. The fog was the problem and not so much the light. Here's an early picture of the lighthouse first. This is the very first image that we have of it. Taken in 1874, this is kind of its inaugural photograph, and at the top is the first lightkeeper by the name of Casper Kuhn. This is one of those pictures I was lucky enough to get from the Park Service. Casper Kuhn, because he was the first one out there, spent his first year there alone. No light assistant keepers, no family, no nothing. He was just there by himself. And one of the things that they found out very quickly about lightkeepers, not just at Sable Point, but all around Lake Superior, is the isolation and loneliness would have a tendency to drive these guys a little nutty. They were really isolated. The only way to Sable Point at that time was strictly by boat. Their only company out there would be this, which was what they called the lighthouse tenders. They brought them books, supplies. There was a little library at Sable Point. Anything that they needed would be brought in by one of these lighthouse tenders. There were two of them. Another one was called the Marigold, but the Amaranth is the one that came in most often. And the Marigold was built under an identical ship pattern, so they're identical looking. One of the unique things that I think about the Amaranth, because of all the different times that they came in and out of there, it never once ran afoul of the point. And I think it was eventually retired in the 1940s. But of all the ships that wrecked out there and had trouble, that one never did. It always managed to get in and out and never seemed to have a lick of trouble with getting in and out of there, surprisingly enough. Almost all of the lightkeepers only lasted maybe 3-4 years. They were quite hard for people to man on the lighthouses because, like I said, the loneliness, the isolation, they just could not take it. So we had a turnover of lightkeepers out there that was rather frequent. This I'm showing here is a picture of a ship named the Mary Jarecki. She's about to do something that was very common at the time, which is pick up a tow of ships. A tow of ships is where they would run a line from one to the other to the other to a lead ship, and they would ship them full of cargo across Lake Superior. The problem with this is that they would only have a couple of crew members on the tow ships, and when a storm would come up, they could sink the entire tow. It happened quite a bit along over by the Grand Marais area where you'd see 6 or 7 ships would have gotten shipwrecked at the same time. But it was because of this practice of towing. On the 4th of July in 1883, Sable Point was again shrouded in fog, and in the distance a wooden freighter named the Mary Jarecki was lost in the mist. Captain Anthony Everett searched for a way through the fog, but they had lost track of where they were completely. In an attempt to get past the dense fog, the Mary Jarecki was sailing at full steam. Somehow the ship was turned toward shore and with a full head of steam ran onto the bank. Her propellers churning the water hard, the bow of the ship hit the beach with a scrape and crunch that shot through the entire vessel. The front of the ship squealed to halt, resting a full 3 feet out of the water. Mary Jarecki had beached and beached badly. If it had gone another mile, it would have torn its hull apart on the reef, and most of the crew probably would have died. The lightkeeper at the time's name was Boozler, and you could see the Mary Jarecki well from the light tower of Sable, and made a note of it in the log. On the 4th day of July, 1883, the steam barge Mary Jarecki ran on its shore. She is a total wreck here. Commander Captain Everett from Kenosha, Wisconsin, no lives were lost. Everett, not willing to give up his ship, traveled to Sault Ste. Marie to initiate salvage operations. He hired the tug Mystic, and they returned to Sable Point with pumps and lightened the cargo, getting off what they could. They pumped for a day and a night, but with no luck, and the Mary Jarecki had too big a hole in her hull somewhere. It was surmised that the hull's frame had been fractured too. The owners gave her up. But that wasn't the end of the attempts. Mary Jarecki was now a target for salvage. If she could be refloated, the ship would belong to the salvagers. A tug named the Oswego came with pumps, a diver, and a lighter barge named the Vampire. I'm not sure what you call that ship, a Vampire. But for working on the wreck, the diver went down and patched the hull as well as possible, and then they set the pumps to working. For 3 days and 2 nights, they ran the pumps. The water inside the ship never fell an inch. They gave up. 1 month later, another attempt was made. With all the optimism that we mustered, the Marquette Mining Journal reported the wrecking tug Kate Williams had been at work on the wrecked propeller Mary Jarecki for the past couple of weeks, and they may have gotten off by this time. The tug was provided with a small full wrecking outfit and a force of divers. The bottom was found to be in a badly damaged state, being pounded full of bad holes, which the divers were patching up at the last attempt we had from there. When this was done, 6 large steam pumps were to be set to work and pumping the water out of her in an attempt to make raise from the pontoons. The captain in charge anticipated no difficulty in raising her and thinks he will deliver her at the dry docks in a short time. The Mary Jarecki never moved. The salvage operation was given up. The ship was offered for sale. On September 25th, Frederick Boozler watched the Mary Jarecki from the light tower. The wind was blowing hard and Lake Superior was beating the stranded ship mercilessly. Boozler stood and watched as the ship was pounded to pieces. The shoreline was her end. She lies there still today for all to see. Boozler's entry was Mary Jarecki's epitaph. Mary Jarecki went to pieces from the 24th to the 25th of September, 1883. We can still see the Mary Jarecki when you walk the shore at Sable Point. That's part of her there. That's one of the things about Sable Point. It still has a lot of the shipwrecks still sitting there. And the Park Service has done its best to keep those in place. One of the things I mentioned earlier was the fact that the lightkeepers didn't stay long. We have one exception to that rule, and it's a keeper by the name of Gus Gegendet, and it was with his wife, Mary, that they it was with his wife, Mary, that they ran the lighthouse together. They had an assistant keeper for a while, but he eventually went away to log in the woods, which was quite popular in the area. The Gegendets Gus and Mary seemed to adjust well to the life at the point. The isolation had taken its toll on the predecessors didn't seem to bother them. Gus enjoyed fishing and bragged he caught 114 brook trout. There was hunting and wild food in the area was plentiful, and he could add to food supplies. Between the now developing fruit trees and wild game in the area, the light station was becoming self-sustaining. That was one of the things that the lightkeepers often did too, was planted gardens, brought in fruit trees. They all came in on the amaranth. One of the incidents that happened to Gus and Mary, though, you look at the size of the lighthouse there, and kind of keep it in mind while I'm reading this passage. In the late 1800s, some of the ships became passenger vessels. A newspaper like the Mining Journal frequently published first-hand accounts of ship travel and the wondrous natural sights of Lake Superior. Passenger ships became more and more popular, and their appearance was frequent. Passenger lines touting destinations in the Great Lakes were quite lucrative. Stories of the pictured rocks and their overwhelming beauty and the breathtaking nature of Lake Superior as a whole created early tourism. Regular schedules from Detroit, Chicago, Port Huron would sail to Mackinac Island and points north, as the advertising used to proclaim, hitting all the highlights for your sightseeing pleasure. Sioux Locks, which were still considered a marvel of engineering and an attraction, was promoted along with Grand Sable Dunes and the pictured rocks as trip highlights. These ships would carry quite a diversity of passengers, from poor immigrants searching for jobs and the better life, next to the rich traveler that was touring the world. The vast wilderness was filling up quickly. It was evening in July 1891 that just such a ship was sailing offshore Grand Sable Dunes, heading for Sable. The cold water of Lake Superior was reacting with the heat of summer and the hot air of the dunes, creating a dense fog. Captain Green was sounding the whistle of his ship, Empire State, in an attempt to hear where the shore was located by listening to the echo. Suddenly, the echo wasn't right. The captain adjusted his course to the north, thinking he was close to Sable Point. He was correct. Almost immediately, he hit the reef nearly a mile offshore. The lake was fairly calm. Captain Green decided to try to back the Empire State off the rock shoal. He kept at it into the night when the wind started to kick up. Green decided his efforts were futile and turned his attention to the passengers and crew. He gave the order for everyone to head for shore. The lifeboats were launched and all of the passengers and crew made it to the beach safely. It was 3 a.m. when there was a banging on the lighthouse door. Gus Gigandet opened the door and stared out at 64 cold and wet people. They were all chattering at each other, creating a noisy spectacle in the darkness. 24 passengers and 40 crewmen had all been drenched when they climbed out of the lifeboats. They were in need of shelter. The residence at Sable was built for 64 extra people, but the Gigadets didn't let that deter them. They housed and fed them all. The 24 passengers stayed at the lighthouse until the next night when a ship named the India picked them up. The Empire State's crew of 40 stayed for 2 more days. They provided their best hospitality in what had to be a difficult situation. The Sable log records the unexpected visit. On the 17th of July, the passenger propeller Empire State ran on the reef 1 mile northwest of the lighthouse. Bound east in the thick fog, she had on board 24 passengers, 16 male and 8 female, 40 in the crew, and all came ashore to the lighthouse on the 18th at 3:30 a.m. It was blowing a fresh breeze from the northwest. All log entries have weather reports. All passengers got passage on board the propeller India at 8 o'clock p.m. on the 18th. The crew did not leave the lighthouse till the 20th at 4 o'clock a.m. Though many thought the Empire State was stuck for good on the reef, Captain Martin Swain, with his tug Favorite, had other ideas. They brought along a diver who systematically patched all the holes and leaks in the ship. The Empire State was carrying 700 tons of copper ore from the Keweenaw, a cargo of considerable worth. Often the passenger ships carried cargo along with their fares, maximizing the ship's profits for each voyage. Using a lighter barge, they were able to remove about half of the copper. Then with the steam pumps, they began to pump her dry. The reef had a firm grip on the ship, which had settled on the bottom. Eventually, they lightened the ship through the lightened the ship enough to refloat her, and she was free of the reef. On July 22nd, just 10 days after the grounding, the Empire State was on its way back towards the Sioux, steaming under its own power. Again, the lighthouse log confirms this. On the 22nd of July, the Empire State was pulled off the reef at 10:30 p.m., bound for Sault Ste. Marie. Now, the other things I want to show here, too, real quick. I kind of missed this. This is the logging that was going on around the lighthouse at the time. This is the mouth of the Hurricane River. The guy that's in the boat is not looking at the logs. He's looking at the wreck of the Mary Jarecki, which is what's laying right there in the foreground. That's how close to the shore it was. But they also, like I said, the entire Sable Point became loaded with all these logs in the wintertime, because that was the only time that they could log was during the winter. The ground would be frozen and they could pull them out with the horses and whatnot. Whereas the summertime, when things broke up, they would come and get the logs, take them to the sawmills in Grand Marais. 12 miles away in Grand Marais, things were changing quickly. The Alger Smith Company had moved in and was buying the local lumbering concern. They had been logging the woods for Mastique to Sini, which was 25 miles south, and now their eyes set on Grand Marais to the north and its natural harbor. Grand Marais Harbor is kidney-shaped and was the only safe harbor for 50 miles to the west of Munising, or 60 miles to the east at Whitefish Point. Grand Marais was a natural choice. There had been a sawmill there for years, but the business had dried up and was now sitting fallow. Alger Smith saw this as an ideal opportunity to not only purchase the sawmill, but put in a railroad from Sini to Grand Marais in 1894. Before, the only way into Grand Marais was by ship. The railroad changed everything. Grand Marais exploded with workers and passengers coming into the lumber town. They arrived by rail and by ship. Alger Smith's own men migrating north, filling the woods, and hiring any other able-bodied men in between. They purchased most of the forest land surrounding Grand Marais to the east and west, and included much of the land that surrounded Sable Point, while other smaller new companies grabbed the parcels that were left. By 1896, Grand Marais had gone from a town of 177 people to 2,000. The shoreline became packed with lumber and stacked anywhere there was available space, and there were logs and sawed boards. Next to them could be mountains of shingles. Every inch of shoreline was a staging area for the lumber, and there could be as many as 30 ships crowding the little harbor at any one time. This increased the traffic at Sable dramatically, because again, the ships were attempting to get into here, which is less than a mile from Sable. They would have had to maneuver around the point to get back in. It was really getting pretty busy there, and it was also getting quite dangerous out there with the increased traffic. The weather in the fall can be a dangerous thing, and in October 1896, Gus Gigondet became ill. His wife Mary kept the lake going and tried to care for him at the same time. It was an insurmountable task. The chill of autumn had struck deep, and Gus was getting worse. Mary diligently continued keeping the light, and after 2 weeks, Gus died. A brief statement in the log, a simple entry: on the 29th day of October, Gus Gigondet, the principal keeper, died after an illness of 2 weeks. Mary continued on. This was not unusual in the lighthouse service. She stayed there and ran the lighthouse by herself until the end of the season. They had been there a total of 12 years, which is the longest anyone ever stayed there. So we have an example of one of the women taking over and running everything, and that, like I said, in the lighthouse service, that wasn't unusual. We have a lot of different cases. There's a wonderful book out there called The Women of the Lights that shows how much they really participated. It's not unusual for entire families to be out there. It was not unusual for the wives to become assistant keepers. And it was not unusual for them to, like I say, stay within the lighthouse service. Anyway, this picture here that's short Grand Marais up at the top there. That's all lumber. In 1900, the life-saving service was established at Grand Marais. They hadn't been there before. The closest one was at the Two-Hearted in Deer Park. And when they put in the life-saving service at Grand Marais, that changed a lot at Sable Point. All of these were situated though they couldn't prevent the shipwrecks, they were able to reduce the loss of lives, and they were instrumental in saving many of the ships that had foundered and were recoverable or salvageable. The lightkeeper at Sable would now be able to send out an alarm for help. A ship in trouble signal was arranged by a series of blasts on the locomotive steam whistles installed in the fog signal building. These were amazing and intrepid men. When a ship was in distress, no matter how vicious and violent the weather was, these men would launch their surf boats into the highest waves, breaking through to row to a floundering vessel, bringing the crews back alive. It was dangerous work, and the lifesavers could be lost just as easily as they were saving. Captain Trudell, the commander at Grand Marais, drilled his men incessantly. For them, preparedness meant life or death, not just their own. They could be seen daily launching their boats into the wildest surf, and they pulled the oars against the force of the water and would dip into the deep troughs of waves only to have to pull through the next. Trudell's men were some of the finest in the service. Pretty much became legendary. They rescued countless men in their tenure and remained in the highest regard to this day. The lifesavers had a say. Regulations say we have to go out, but they don't say anything about coming back. With that, the Grand Marais Storm Warriors began their tenure at 1900. For Sable, the coming of Trudell and his crew meant the lightkeepers were now active participants in the rescues of the ship and their crews. Their watch now was not only to keep the light and the fog signals going, but also watch the horizon for signs of distress. The lightkeepers would now walk the shoreline regularly, looking for signs of distress and the odd body or two that would occasionally wash ashore. A ship named Sitka. I think we have a picture of her. This story is one of the other, I don't have a picture of her, but this story is one of the other wrecks that can be very visibly seen along the shoreline. Ship named the Sitka was streaming toward Sable Point, and it was a misty day with no wind, but the usual gale that plagued the point, or the dense fog. Overall, Lake Superior was quiet. No one is sure why, but on October 4th, the Sitka ran onto Sable Reef, hard. Fortunately, the incident was seen by another passing ship, the Hunter, and as they sailed into Grand Marais, they signaled the life-saving station there of the grounding of the Sitka. Captain Trudell roused his men, and soon they were in the surf boat rowing for Sable Point. It took them 3 hours to row 9 miles. When they arrived, it was obvious the Sitka was in real trouble. She was taking on water in a number of places, and the assessment didn't look good. Trudell advised the crew to give up, abandon the ship, but the captain, F.E. Johnson, didn't want to give up. He insisted Trudell take several messages back to Grand Marais to be sent to the Sault Ste. Marie requesting tugs. There was no way he was willing to give up. He was certain if he had help, they could get the Sitka free. Trudell had a different plan. Instead of rowing the surf boat back to Grand Marais, he had his men row to the Sable lighthouse instead. He sent one of his men with the message back to Grand Marais on foot. He then had the rest of his men camp on the beach next to the lighthouse where they could watch the Sitka through the night. By early in the morning, the waves started to kick up and Lake Superior was getting rough. Once again, Trudell had his men head out to the ship thinking maybe by now they might be ready to come ashore. He was right. They had enough and were ready to come off the Sitka. They launched the Sitka's 2 lifeboats, and with the surf boat, they were able to get all 17 crewmen off as well as their baggage. They were deposited on the beach in front of the lighthouse. The crew of the Sitka walked overland to Grand Marais, leaving at the lighthouse all of their luggage. It was certainly the better choice for those living in the light station. 17 extra people staying would have been difficult at best. They had enough that a rough Lake Superior had stranded the lifesavers. They were there for 4 days. They all stood on the beach. Sorry, I lost my place. They all stood on the beach and watched the Lake Superior pound on the Sitka. The raging winds and waves swept away the deck houses. Next, the rudder broke loose, and finally the Sitka broke in 2. In just a couple of days, Lake Superior had destroyed the Sitka. She lies on the shore still, easily seen scattered along the beach at Sable. The lightkeepers had their hands full with the lifesavers there. They served 40 meals to Trudell's men. Otto Buffy, the lightkeeper at the time, put in a request for reimbursement at 25 cents a meal. When the life-saving crew left, they rowed to the Sitka and salvaged some of the navigation equipment, compasses, and sextant. A few days later, Otto Buffy's pregnant wife, became ill. She sent an assistant suite to Grand Marais to bring the local doctor. When he arrived, she was in a bad way. She gave birth to a baby boy. He was stillborn. An entry reads, 4 p.m. Mrs. Boofy was delivered of a dead male child. The next day was a funeral, and the infant was buried at the lighthouse. The next year, 1905, the Boofys would lose another child, and another grave was added to at Au Sable. A month later, the Boofys would be transferred to Point Iroquois near the Sioux. Their tenure at Au Sable was only 2 years, but it was full of tragedy and loss. They could no longer stay there, though they had remained at the lighthouse. Though they remained in the lighthouse service at Point Iroquois. Now, occasionally, a mystery would crop up out there. This, when we came across this, was just, for me, absolutely fascinating. Something washed ashore at Au Sable. A man named Van Dusen spotted a small sailboat along the shore near the light station at Au Sable. The mast was broken and it appeared to have been through some rough weather. He went up to the boat and looked in. Inside was the body of a dead man. It looked like the body had taken a beating. The head had been beaten almost beyond recognition, and the shoulders and neck looked broken and battered. The dead man wore the uniform of the lighthouse service. Lightkeeper Irvine recorded the incident. Second assistant returned 9 a.m. Mr. William Van Dusen of Grand Marais reported a lighthouse boat ashore with a dead man in her about 9 miles west of the station. I sent first assistant to report it to the life-saving station. Crew arrived here at 9 p.m. I went up with them and brought the boat to the station. They took the body to Grand Marais. The man apparently died from exposure. As he was lying forward under the forward deck, foremast gone, mainmast standing, the boat was in good shape, only one small hole in her. I think it is from Grand Island Light Station. The body was identified as Assistant Lightkeeper Edward Morrison from the North Grand Island Light Station. How he had come to Au Sable Point was a mystery. He was identified by a tattoo on his arm. Excuse me. The body was taken back to Munising, and tales were coming in that the North Grand Island Light had been dark for a week. The idea that Morrison died from exposure faded quickly. A group of Munising residents went out there to investigate. What they found made everything even more mysterious. The head lightkeeper, George Gennari, had completely disappeared. The supplies he had brought back from Munising were still sitting on the dock. As they made a search of the light, they found nothing out of the ordinary. Things were meticulously in place. Gennari's coat was hung on a hook in the boathouse. Morrison's vest was hanging on the back of a chair with papers and his watch still in the pockets. Of the 3 boats that were normally left at the station, and the story differs here, one source says 1 was missing, and another source says there were 2. No one could understand what had happened. Authorities began a search for the missing Gennari, but he had completely disappeared. There were some that said they had seen Gennari around the local bars in Munising drinking heavily, but none of these could be substantiated. Gennari's wife, who was living in town, claimed she hadn't seen him either, but those that talked to her claimed she seemed unconcerned. The reason for this could be that Gennari had a reputation of having a temper and wasn't easy to work with. He required a new assistant every season since his appointment. The domestic life could have been rocky, to say the least. There are 2 basic theories that came out at the time to try and explain the events. The first theory is that the pair were murdered. The north point of Grand Island is another very isolated light station. The nearest neighbor was the Grand Island gamekeeper, who lived 7 miles away. When Gennari and Morrison had been in town to pick up supplies, they had been paid. The pair was going back to the lighthouse with full pockets. The North Light would have been an ideal place for a robbery. The second theory, and the strongest, is that Gennari killed him. The scenario goes as follows. Morrison brought the wheelbarrow down to the dock to help haul supplies back to the station. The evidence of this is the hung coat and vest, which would have had both men in shirt sleeves, warm from the work. Because of Gennari's personality and reputation, Morrison probably said something that set Gennari off. In a flash of rage, Gennari grabbed something like an oar, or a shovel that beat Morrison's skull in. To hide the crime, he put Morrison in a boat and sent it out into Lake Superior, probably hoping it would never be found and he could say his assistant had deserted, or he was out in the boat and was hit with the boom from the sail. Whatever he thought, he went into musing and went on a several-day drunk. He then probably went home, and when news of the body found at Sable came in, he fled. Strangely, before he died, Morrison had sent his wife a letter, who lived in Flint, Michigan. She received it 4 days after he had died. In the letter he wrote, "Do not be surprised if you hear of my body being found dead along the shores of Lake Superior." He goes on to say that Gennari was of a quarrelsome disposition, and he thought there might be an accident if he were to oppose him. To this day, the mystery remains unsolved, and no one really knows what happened to the dead man at Sable Point. One other mystery that kind of popped up there, which I found rather interesting. Sometimes we never really know what goes on out there during the storms and out in the lakes, but thank you. But further out in Lake Superior, other tragedies were happening. Tragedies discovered only when the ships were overdue, their fates unknown. Evidence of this washed up on the shore of Sable in the form of a grim message in a bottle in 1910. The log entry leaves us with a mystery. Second Lieutenant Mosen of Grand Marais found a bottle with a slip of paper containing the following: Lake Superior, August 4th, 1901. To those who find this, gone down with all hands, Steamer Mapleton, Lord have mercy on us all, Captain Stinson. The message in the bottle had been floating in Lake Superior for 9 years. Maybe now those that were waiting for the long overdue ship would know it had been lost. In searching records, there seems to be no evidence of a steamer named Mapleton. There are a few Captain Stinsons on record, but since the note doesn't include a first name or initial, locating the right one is problematic. Captain Stinson, the Mapleton, their crew, and their fate seems to be lost in time. This ship is called the South Shore. This is one of the pictures I didn't manage to get in time to get into the book. This is a little boat that was owned by a man by the name of Ora Endress out of Grand Marais. He purchased a small wooden steamer called the South Shore, and with the railroad gone from Grand Marais, actually I didn't mention that, the railroad was pulled up when Alger Smith left. When all the logs ran out, which was in about 10 years, they took the railroad with them and the tracks. So literally Grand Marais was once again isolated. So was Sable Point. There was, the only way that they were able to get supplies was this little ship, which would travel the south shore of Lake Superior between Munising and Whitefish Point. And they would deliver just about anything they needed to, but particularly in the fall, they would deliver all of the winter supplies to all of those communities along the shoreline. He also, Ora Endress would also frequently take on passenger on his ship too, of course, besides just taking on supplies. He did quite well with the business for a few years. That was until late November of 1912. November is never a good time to have to sail Lake Superior. We're all aware of that, living here. The unpredictability and the utter and complete violence of the gales have taken hundreds of ships to the bottom across the Great Lakes. Hurricane-force winds can and do come with the November storms. So do blizzards. Endress was sailing the South Shore towards Grand Marais, coming from Sault Ste. Marie, when the ship became engulfed in blinding snow. A northeast gale had blown up and things were getting dicey fast. The waves had built and it became apparent that the South Shore wouldn't be able to get into Grand Marais Harbor. The direction of the wind was taking the surf directly into the bay, northeast being the only direction the wind can do this. Ora Endres had spent a lot of years on the Great Lakes. He was well seasoned and knew what he was doing. Endres made a decision that was not made lightly. He had 4 passengers on the ship and 10 crewmen. Endres took the option he thought gave the ship and those on it their best chances. He decided to try to ride the storm out in the open water. He could put the bow to the wind and hope for the best. The storm blew mercilessly into the night, but Endres, keeping his bow to the waves, was working his way north and east out into Lake Superior. He had sailed almost halfway to Caribou Island, about 25 miles out from Grand Marais. The waves beat the ship rolling over the decks. Slowly her seams started to open. One huge wave came and swept away the part of the cabin house. Another wave pounded in part of the wheelhouse. The raging surf broke out windows and the south shore was covered in a sheet of ice. Then water coming in the hull reached the boiler fires and put them out. The south shore was without power. The ship was driven before the storm. The helpless south shore rose and fell between the massive troughs of waves. The wet and cold passengers and the crew all manned the hand pumps trying to keep the beleaguered ship afloat. It was a long night, and as morning rolled around, the ship was still afloat. The Grand Marais lifesavers spotted the south shore about 10 miles out. Endres, who was likely too busy trying to save the ship, wasn't flying any distress flags. Captain Trudell deduced that they might need help anyway, and there may have been a small desire to take out the lifesavers' new motor-powered surf boat named the Audacity. It's a guy thing. The days of rowing were behind them, at least as long as the motor didn't conk out. Motorized surf boats made the life-saving service more efficient, and they were quicker to respond to wrecks and quicker to unload the passengers and crew. It had been a major improvement for the lifesavers and those that depended on them. When they reached the south shore, she was nearly awash and floundering as she was very full of water. They tried everything. They jettisoned the cargo and helped work the pumps. At one point, they even tried to rebuild the fire, but it was to no avail. The decision had to be made. The lifesavers took off the 4 passengers and the 10-man crew and headed back to shore. The abandoned south shore was now at the mercy of Lake Superior. She was blown west towards Sable Point and Grand Sable Dunes. All the while, Lake Superior continued to batter the south shore. Eventually, she rolled into the shore and sank in 12 feet of water. That's the captain standing up there. And that's Grand Sable Dunes in the background. It's a very hard to see copy of the picture, but it's one of the neatest shipwreck photos I've ever seen. All the while, Lake Superior continued to batter the south shore. Eventually, she rolled into the shore and sank 12 feet of water. Her final resting place would be where Sable Point meets Grand Sable Dunes west of the log slide. The loss of the south shore caused considerable hardship. Supplies she was carrying was the winter stockpile for many along the route, and the winter was lean for those waiting for the south shore to make her run. The run she never completed. The south shore can sometimes still be seen. It's quite visible when standing atop the log slide, gazing across at the vastness of Sable Point. The very peak out there is Sable Point. This is what they call the log slide overlook, and this at the top of Grand Sable Dunes. It's about 500 feet above the water. The south shore is right about here. And when you look down at Lake Superior from below the log slide, but towards Sable Point, her shape can be seen under the shallow water. From time to time, the sand will cover and uncover the remains of the south shore. So like the ghost she is, she appears only occasionally when the conditions are just right. Now, getting towards the end of my presentation here, one of the last things in 1920 that I'm going to put out here, 1923, a major change took place that would affect those all around Sable Point. Benjamin Trudell of the now Coast Guard retired. Trudell had demanded the very best of his men, and he had held the station to the highest standards since the moment it opened, and he had stepped into the job as commander of the lifesavers. To this day, Trudell is considered a legend of the lifesaving service, and his shoes would be hard to fill. Now, the reason I bring this up is because of this last story I want to put out here as far as the shipwrecks and stuff. One of the lake keepers' name was Class Hemringa, and he came to Sable from Passage Island Light on Isle Royal. And when he was there on Passage Island, he managed to save 60 people from a shipwreck on Isle Royal. A ship called the Monarch had gone and run full speed into Isle Royal, and he was the one who was sent out to go rescue him. He received a Medal of Honor for it. Anyway, he had also been shipwrecked twice on his own, once around the Cape of Good Hope and once in the South Seas. So he was familiar with the hardships of shipwrecks. On his last year, as he was about to retire, within 2 months of his retirement, actually probably 30 days. Anyway, Keeper Hemringa's tenure was almost through. He was going to retire and tell stories to his grandchildren. Little did he know there were more stories to be made. They would be closing the lighthouse for the season in just a few days. November 29th, 1929, saw a storm move in from the north. It rapidly turned into a blizzard. Steaming towards Sable was a freighter named the Kiowa. Her holds were full of flaxseed headed for Chicago. The blizzard caught up with the ship, then it engulfed it. The ever-growing seas were rough, and they tossed the steamer helplessly. Suddenly, the entire cargo of seed shifted to one side, causing the Kiowa to have a terrible list. It was so bad that water was coming in the portholes. Captain Alex T. Young was terrified and ordered 9 of his men into one of the lifeboats. He then got in himself and ordered the lifeboat to be lowered, leaving behind 23 of his men to fend for themselves. The ship was encased in a sheet of ice, and water was freezing into everything, including the men. His wet, cold crew were lowering the lifeboat when one of the lines snapped, dumping the men into Lake Superior. Cold and wet, 6 of the men were pulled back aboard ship by their shipmates. Another managed to reach the lifeboat. The rest, including the captain, disappeared beneath the icy waves of Superior. The Kiowa drifted along the shore, pulled by the storm. Arthur Cronk, the first mate, was now the acting captain. The crew was afraid, and he tried to keep them calm as the situation worsened. Things weren't looking good for the crew, but on the shore, someone saw the Kiowa's situation. Keeper Class Hemringa kept a personal journal and wrote of the wreck. In it, he describes the events of the fateful night of the Kiowa. On November 30th, 1929, steamer Kiowa drifted 6 miles west of the light station with a northwest gale. The crew launched a lifeboat Saturday, which capsized, drowning 5 of the men. Everything on board the Kiowa was coated with ice, making it impossible to launch the boats. The steamer was on the side, stemmed down with a 45-degree list. Mr. Chilson and 2 others were coming from a hunting trip west of the light station at 2 p.m. Sunday in a small gas boat, with rowboat in tow. Seeing the steamer, they picked off 3 men and made for the lighthouse as the wind began to pick up from the northeast. The men were almost frozen. We immediately sounded the whistle at 2 p.m. and gave danger signals for an hour or so. We could not see help coming, so we launched our gas boat. We started about dusk, and it was dark when we arrived at the steamer Kiowa. 6 men were accommodated in the gas boat, 5 in the rowboat, and 5 in Chilson's boat. When we had the crew all off and were about a mile from the boat, Following the shoreline, making for a hunting camp about 4 miles from the station, we saw the light of the Coast Guard boat coming. Flashing them signals, we ran alongside and put 16 of the crew on the Coast Guard boat, which took them to Grand Marais. Since the retirement of Benjamin Trudell, the Grand Marais Coast Guard seemed to be not quite as efficient as they had been in the past. They had extra duties added to their routines as they became more and more assimilated into the Coast Guard. Post-World War I had seen the entrance of things like fear of enemy submarines in the Great Lakes. The Coast Guard had brought in ships like submarine chasers into Lake Superior. When Sable signaled for aid with the wreck of the Kiowa, the Coast Guard did not respond as quickly as they had in the past. The Coast Guard crews had been working on a submarine telephone cable when the Sable whistle blew. The Coast Guard reports say that they dropped the repair job and responded to the distress call promptly. Keeper Hemringa's journal doesn't bear that out. Neither does his entry in the station log. Sunday, about 2 p.m., a boat came to station telling us that a boat got ashore last night, sometime between 7 to 8 p.m. Weather clear at the time. 5 men lost their lives. Started to sound signal for Coast Guard at 2 p.m. Did not come till dark. Sent a first assistant in station gas boat, rowboat. Also, the hunting party in their gas boat got the crew of 15 men before the Coast Guard hove in sight. Supposedly, they scrambled the lifeboat and headed for the light station at Sable, but why it was after dark before they appeared going overland was impossible, as the blizzard had now deposited heavy wet snow into huge drifts. They claimed they stopped at the Sable lighthouse and learned from the keeper that the Kiowa was on shore west of Sable. If the Coast Guard spoke with anyone, it would have been one of the lightkeeper's wives. The 2 assistant keepers had accompanied Hemringa to assist with their own rescue after Chilson had deposited the first load of Kiowa crew and gone back a second time for more and removed a second load of the crew before they encountered the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard log about the incident is detailed in all aspects except in how they removed the crew from the Kiowa. It gives the impression that the Coast Guard rescued all of the Kiowa's crew by stating removed all 6 of the remaining crew safely, saying nothing about the part Chilson, his hunting buddies, and Hemringa and his assistants played in saving what was left of the crew. A Grand Marais fishing tug, Josephine Addison, saw a lifeboat floating in the water. It was the lifeboat from the Kiowa. The one man that had managed to climb aboard was still on it. It was frozen, encased in ice. He was the 6th fatality of the Kiowa. The portion of the crew that had been dropped at the lighthouse were still there. The Coast Guard didn't return for them immediately because another steamer, the George H. Donovan, was in trouble and they had to make a run out to her. They piloted her into the harbor and was saved. It was another day before they could get back to Sable to pick up the rest of the crew. And Chilson and his 2 hunting partners were still there as well, and they went back to Grand Marais. In the bad weather, the harbor had frozen, and they had to break the ice to get into the bay. The Kiowa was one of the worst wrecks in the area, and shipwreck historians have debated whether the Grand Marais Coast Guard had missed the rescue and tried to gloss over the mistake with the report. Lightkeeper Hemringa and his 2 assistants, John R. Hammond and William Campbell, received commendations for their assistance they lent to the crew of to the Kiowa. If it weren't for them, and of course Chilson and his hunting partners, the unsung heroes of the rescue, the loss of life would have been much higher. Again, Hemringa had come through for those in distress. He retired 2 weeks later after a lifetime of distinguished service with another commendation from the Lighthouse Service. Heroes shine when heroes are needed. And the last little thing I'm going to read here is kind of, come on, behave. There. When standing at Sable, this seemingly benign section of shoreline is deceptive. quiet beaches and lush forests surround it today as it did then. Only now, as a part of the Pictured Rocks National Shoreline, one of our finest national parks, there are a few more visitors making the walk to the station. It's not so alone anymore. But little else has changed. Breathtaking views of the colossal Grand Sable dunes are to the east towards Grand Marais, to the west of the beaches that have freshwater springs seeping into the beach and Lake Superior. The Hurricane River teems with trout. My father once told me that the trout were so thick in the hurricane that you could walk across it on their backs. I've never quite seen that, but it is full of fish. The thick forest still stands in all its majesty, filling in the miles surrounding Sable's nature's wilderness at its finest. It's only when walking the shoreline that Sable's true nature hits home. The Mary Jarecki, the Sitka, and the Gale Staples both lie on the shore still. Countless pieces of other wrecks are scattered between. No longer is it simply a beach. It's a graveyard, a watery cemetery. Remnants of ships are the tombstones of the nameless lost. Sable Point is a place of paradox, yin and yang. What is admired today for its beauty and uniqueness was dreaded in the past, feared to the marrow, and the fear was justified. Sable Point, Sable Point is a place of mystery and tragedy. Located on the southern shore of Lake Superior in the heart of the region known as the Shipwreck Coast, Sable was called Big Sable in its early days. It's a graveyard of ships and men that stands alone among the Great Lakes. It's an extraordinary place that attracted extraordinary events. And that's how I'm going to wrap this up. Anybody have any questions or comments or anything? Okay,
Thank you very much, Michael. That was very interesting.